Hi everyone, I've made many videos on this channel before talking about the publishing industry and how to get published, and I'll link that playlist in the description box down below. Now, once you are published as a writer, the daunting prospect is having to write another book and the pressure of writing that second book. When you're writing your first book, you have potentially all the time in the world, but often when you're writing your next book, it's to a deadline. You understand more about the publishing industry and you have that fear of, will this be as good as my first book? It's a little bit scary. So when I was at the Cheltenham Book Festival last year in October, I sat down with one of my favourite people, Ayobami Adebayo, who is the author of Stay With Me. This is her debut book that came out in 2017, and I spoke a lot about it when it came out because I really loved it. It first came out in Nigeria, which is where Ayobami lives, and the week after it came out in the UK, it was longlisted for the Women's Prize for Fiction. This is not something that Ayobami thought would happen. It was a very pleasant surprise. She was then shortlisted for the prize as well. So I wanted to sit down and talk to her about how that felt, and now that she's writing a second book, the pressures that she feels and any worries that she has. We had a right giggle recording this podcast. We spoke about the importance of imagery, character names, we talked about African folklore. We don't discuss spoilers with regard to the book, so if you haven't read Stay With Me, you can still listen to it, don't worry about that. This is actually an episode of Books with Jen, which is my podcast where I talk with authors about their books. So if you would prefer to download this episode to listen to when you're out and about, I'll leave a link in the description box down below. You can search for Books with Jen on the podcast app, on SoundCloud, on Stitcher, or you can just continue listening / watching this video. One of my New Year's resolutions is to make sure that my content is as accessible to as many people as possible. So I've been adding closed captions to all of my videos for those who are hard of hearing or deaf, and I'm also providing transcripts of all of my podcasts as well. It used to be that YouTube would do auto-generated closed captions where they would guess what you were saying. Often that would be incorrect, but I could go in and edit that transcript, so it would take less time than transcribing from scratch. But on a lot of my videos recently, that hasn't been happening, or at least hasn't been happening quickly. So I've had to transcribe all of my content from scratch, sitting down, transcribing everything that is being said. That takes a really long time, about 4 or 5 times longer than the video or podcast itself. So for a podcast, it takes especially long time. So if you like Books with Jen and you would like to help support it, you can support me on Patreon, which would mean a lot. I will leave a link in the description box down below. Patreon is a service, a website where you can tip your favorite creators. So when I'm recording a podcast with an author, I travel to where they happen to be. That might be somewhere, a different place in the country, and that takes a long time. Plus I pay for that travel myself. Then I spend hours editing the podcast and then hours transcribing the podcast as well. I love doing it, which is why I do it, but because it takes so much time, any support you can offer is amazing. If you can't support in monetary terms, listening and spreading the word about the podcast is also excellent, so thank you very much. So let's go to the interview that I did with Ayobami Adebayo. We first started talking about what it was like growing up surrounded by books and how she didn't have much choice in liking books at all. The next podcast after this one will be a chat with Anna Marie Crowhurst, who wrote The Illumination of Ursula Flight, and that'll be up in a couple of weeks. I hope you guys are having a great week, and I'll speak to you later. Bye.
It was just not an option if you grew up in my family, because it was just there. You were getting books as gifts. There were just all these books around you. And I felt like once I developed a taste for books, I just couldn't stop.
You wanted more.
Yeah.
So when did you start writing?
I remember when I was 9. So it was my first year of secondary school, and it was, of course, very different from primary school. And I remember I was sitting in the back of the class, and instead of sort of paying attention to whatever the teacher was saying, I was writing poetry. Mm-hmm. And I remember this because I got caught and I got punished for it.
You got punished for writing poetry?
Yeah, because I can't remember what class it was, but I wasn't listening at all. Mm. I remember, there was the poetry, and then I remember I read this really long play. It felt long then. I'm sure it was probably like 1,000
it's 40 pages long. I wrote a novel. We don't get to do that anymore.
Yeah, it's this really long play. I don't know what it was about, but I was so proud of it.
So with Stay With Me, when did you start writing that?
started writing in, I think it must have been 2011.
2011.
If I remember correctly. It was a year after I finished uni. And I got the idea for it like in my final year of uni, but I felt I wasn't ready to write a novel yet.
So what was the idea, the seed?
So the seed was, I mean, it was a number of things, but it was something that I had seen on, so I lost one of my friends shortly before then. And I ran into her mother a few days before I started thinking about this story. And, you know, there was just this expression on her face that I couldn't get out of my mind for weeks and weeks. And then I started thinking about what it must mean to survive a child and, you know, outlive your child, and what it means to care for a sick child, and how complicated your emotions can become about that. So the first thing I thought about was a scene that never made it into the book. And I remember I wrote sort of this short story, it's about 2,500 words, and it was just an argument between a couple the wife was leaving because they had the sick children and she just couldn't take it anymore. And so it takes place in their living room. They're having all of this argument, they're having this discussion, and there are people moving the wife's things out of the house. And it was mostly dialogue. And I remember sort of looking at it, I thought it was just a short story. But there was something missing. I didn't know what it was. And I kept thinking to myself, there's something they're not saying, you know, and I don't know what that is. I mean, I'm looking at all this dialogue and I'm like, there's something they're not saying. There's something else going on in this marriage that they're trying to talk about, but they can't talk about because there are all these people in the room. And the minute I figured out what it was, I realized, that's
longer than a short story.
It's not a short story. And what if they can't talk about it even when there's nobody else in the room?
Yeah.
And I think that was when I knew, this has to be a novel. Like, that's what it's about.
So it started haunting you.
Yeah.
Maybe. Yeah, the characters started following you around. You're like, yes, I spent a lot of time with these characters.
Yes.
Well, we talk about writing and how we feel a responsibility to the reader and everything. Did you feel a responsibility to your characters? I feel like there is a very strong connection between you and your characters in this book.
Yeah, absolutely. I really did. It was, it felt bizarre and weird. And even when I talk about it, it just sounds a little kooky.
Did you have an Alice Walker moment? Did you start talking to them?
I did. Yeah. All the time.
Yeah.
There were certain parts of the novel, particularly with some of Yejide's experiences, that I really, really didn't want to write because it was just so difficult.
Yeah.
But I felt like, it almost felt like I would be lying. You know, it felt like this is what happened to her and I have to say it, you know, which was weird because, you know, you made out. But I really felt like she was really real.
She comes from truth, and whilst we make up characters, they're made up of everything we've ever seen ever. So she's like a collage of lots of people you know.
Of course.
Yeah. And it's not surprising that you want to do justice to her. And I think you did that. Not that you need my validation, but I think it's great.
Thank you.
So usually she feels like she doesn't know who she is because her mother had died, and it says the point was that when there was no identifiable lineage for a child, that child could be descended from anything, even dogs, witches, or strange tribes with bad blood. So she longs to have a child to, I'm guessing, to experience, well, you know, anyone might want to long to have a child, but she wants to know what it's like to be a mother because she's never witnessed that. And also to have a lineage of her own and see who she actually is. Yeah. Is that something that you were very conscious of when you were writing the book?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's very critical to a character is that desire that she develops from the time when she's very young, that she wants something that she imagines to be a sort of permanent connection to a person.
What is something that roots her?
Something that roots her, what she imagines that her mother would have done if her mother had lived. And for her to have a child is what's going to do it. Like, I'm going to have this child, and then I'm going to be centered around this person in some way. And that's going to sort of validate me, give meaning to my life. I'm going to understand myself a little better when I have this in my life. And, it doesn't quite work out.
No, it doesn't. But I think that that's really interesting, because I think that a lot of the other women in the novel want her to have a child because you're supposed to have a child.
Yeah.
When she wants to have a child for actually a very different reason. Throughout the book, though, as we said, things don't go to plan. And there are unexpected twists and turns. And I did not see those twists and turns coming. I was like, what is she doing to me? And we can't talk about it because #spoilers. But did you know the direction the book was going to go in when you started? Or did it surprise you too?
There were things, there were parts of it that I sort of knew from the beginning, but a lot of it was surprising. It was a journey of discovery, and which was one of the interesting things about writing it, was that I would think, wow, so that's what's happening, okay.
Yeah. Also, I find that inspiring for any writers out there who think that you have to plot everything in advance. You do not.
The fascinating thing about Stay With Me, to me, in terms of some of the reception it's gotten, is that people really talk about the plot. I'm like, I couldn't plot this in my life.
Yeah.
I didn't plan it. I have tried to write novels by planning them. It always sort of falls apart.
Yeah.
So it's kind of astonishing to me that it just sort of came together as if it was very, very tightly plotted, which it wasn't.
That's how it feels.
Yeah.
I read it, I'm like, this woman knows what she's doing.
No.
No, I don't. No, I don't.
I remember the last sort of major edit I did. I think that's when I knew, I think I'm actually done with this book. Was that I realized I cannot move one chapter because I kept moving things around. And then I read it and I thought, I can't move any chapter. Everything actually has to be exactly where it is, or it doesn't work. I'm like, okay, I think I'm done now.
That must have been very satisfying. Can we talk about the voices in the book?
Yeah.
Because the book is itself a marriage, because you have both of their voices in there. You have Akin and Yejide. And had you always intended to do that?
Yeah, right from the beginning. So the story that became this book was, I think, in third person. But by the time I started thinking of it as a novel, I knew I wanted to have both perspectives. The point of view was kind of up in the air for a while. I was going back and forth between first person, second person, third person. I just was playing around with it until I sort of struck what I felt, this really sounds like Akin, or I think this is how Yejide would say this.
Yeah. And is that because you were conscious of wanting them to not say everything they were thinking? So by having both perspectives, it was a way for you to allow the reader to see what they were thinking, even if they weren't communicating that to each other?
I think both perspectives was because I really did feel that it was their story, and I wanted the two of them to be there. And I felt also that part of their identity is how they tell the story, because it's a story. It's a novel about narrative in a sense, because they are telling the story with intent. So from the beginning, each person is trying to push a certain narrative about this is what happened in the marriage, this is why I made the decisions I made, this is why I did the things I did. And I really felt that with both characters, the way they choose to talk, the things that they withhold, the things they never actually say, say something about who they are, So I wanted to get at that with having the two of them in the novel.
And I think what you said about narrative is very interesting. So Yejide feels almost that her story has been written for her by other people who said, your mother was like this, therefore you are going to be like this. So she is trying to write a completely different narrative for herself. She talks about fairy tales that she wasn't told when she was younger, but that her stepmothers were telling to their children, and she was excluded from those stories. She wasn't allowed to hear about the fairy tales and the happy endings. She had to piece those together from little snippets that she heard elsewhere. And it's beautifully meta in that we're reading it hoping she can change her narrative and can she change things, but we're reading it in a book that's fixed and we can't change anything for her, but we would love to. And it ties your brain in knots. So what because I mentioned fairy tales, there are a lot of fairy tales in here about fate and sacrifice and infertility. What are some fairy tales that you grew up with?
So there's the one Yejide tells, which is about a woman who wants to have children, and she's very successful. So she makes a pact with a tree in the forest that she has one child, and she makes a pact with a tree in the forest and says, if you give me this, I'm going to give you my child, and but all along she plans to hide the child, And
this is before she has a child, isn't it? When she's young, she thinks, yes, I want what I want now, I'll give up something later.
So that by the time she then has the child, she tells the child, you must never go to the forest, and all of that. Of course the child goes into the forest.
Children always go to the forest.
And so the child disappears, and she's never able to find the child again. And the story is, there's this very interesting stories that you hear about, long time ago, everybody used to be able to communicate. Like trees would talk to people, animals would talk to people, and this is how trees stopped talking to people, or this is how animals stopped talking to people, was that by the time she then goes into the forest to try to look for a child, all the trees don't talk to her, and then trees don't talk to people anymore, and all of that. So that's one of them, and there were loads of them that I sort of heard from my grandmother. Yeah.
I love how that kind of takes on a new meaning now as well. If you told it now, it'd be like, well, we've disrespected nature and climate change, and that's why the trees aren't talking to us anymore. Which was not what the point was back then. But I like that, how we can adapt tales to fit whatever
is going on.
Yeah, exactly. So it says in here, she's told Yejide, love is like a test. Do you feel like she's in, or she feels as if she's in her own fable, that she has to jump through hoops, and will she get her happily ever after? She wants to be reborn almost, doesn't she? Renamed, because her name Yejide means image of the mother. So she is the image of a mother without being a mother. Were you very conscious of the meanings of the names of your characters?
Yeah, I mean, it's very important because her name in particular, it's a group of names that you give to children who lose their mother when their mother is giving back to them, or who lose a grandmother or a mother figure around the time that they're born. So once you meet somebody, you hear Yejude, you hear Yetunde, you hear Yetide, you have a sense of, oh, did your grandmother die like a week before you were born? Or did your mother die? And I think, particularly for someone, I think it can be very whimsical for people who sort of lose a grandmother or a great-grandmother. It's a respect thing, like, oh, you are the person who was returned. Like, the grandmother left and then you came, But what happens when it's actually the child, you know, when it's actually your mother, and you have to carry this name, and it's part of your identity. So every time you introduce yourself, you're sort of reliving that.
It comes before you.
It goes ahead of you.
Yeah.
You're totally tied to this experience that was very tragic for you. So I was very particular about that. And for the husband's name, which was Akinyele, which means bravery.
I did my research.
I think that was kind of a bit ironic. He
doesn't stand up to his family. No.
And then of course with the children, the last child's name obviously is the title of the book. The first one is called Olamide, which is a very interesting name to me. It means my wealth has come. There's just something so joyful about that name, and
Now this book's been just a little bit successful. Was that terrifying? And amazing, obviously. But was it a week after the book came out in the UK, you were longlisted for the Women's Prize? I mean, how was that?
Oh my god! I remember. I think I got into London the day before the long list came out.
Yeah.
I just come in. I had an event that evening. It was the very first event I did for the book. And I remember, I think Vicky was with me from Canongate, and she was talking with some other people about the list, you know. I was just chatting about and I remember I wasn't even paying attention, like. And I got back to the place where I was staying, and I went to bed, and I thought, oh, maybe I should stay up till 12. And I'm like, I'll see it tomorrow morning.
Yeah.
I was absolutely, expecting it. And then I think around 6 a.m., I just realized my phone just kept vibrating.
Yeah.
I remember thinking,
you're like, shut up, what 6 a.m.
Yeah, and then it kept moving. I thought, okay, what is wrong? Did something happen at home? Is somebody really madly trying to reach me? And I remember the first thing, of course I did, which was, what I used to do at the time was naturally picked up my phone. Instead of checking the text messages, of course, logged into Twitter, which, is what one does first thing in the morning.
Priorities.
Yeah. And I remember just seeing the Bailey's Prize is now following. I thought, what is going on? That was my first clue. Like, why is the Bailey's Prize following me? And then, of course, realized that my book was on the long list. It was absolutely astonishing. It was totally unexpected. It still feels like a dream, even now. Like, did that really happen?
It did really happen. I can attest that it did really, really happen. And I was 100% rooting for you.
It was absolutely wonderful.
Yeah.
And, I mean, it's also a little bit terrifying.
Well, because it's like, well, now I have to do it again. And you don't want to peak too early there.
There's that, like, I don't know how older people sort of imagine their career going. But, I mean, when I sort of imagined it, if I'm very honest about it, I thought I would write this book. Maybe 500 people would read it. And then I'd write the next one. Maybe hopefully 400 of those 500 people will still be interested in reading the next one. And maybe they'll tell their friends. So maybe we'll have like 1,000 people who are going to read it. And then maybe with the third one, you get shortlisted for something. Yeah. And then people start paying attention, I know with the first book, all of that sort of happens, and it's a lot.
Yeah, it is a lot. But I'm so glad that you're writing another one now, because I saw you earlier in the year, and you were like, "No, I'm not right. No, I'm not doing that." Because you were studying. Are you still studying now?
No.
You stopped it. Okay. So, can you tell us anything about what you're writing? If you can't, don't worry.
So it's difficult for me to talk about. So right up until Stay With Me was published, and I sort of really had to think about how to talk about it.
Yeah.
When people ask me, so what's your book about? I say, it's about a man and a woman, which is all I can say. Like, that's it. So with this one, I think I've been saying, it's about people.
It's about people.
Yeah. So that's where I am right now. It's a book about people.
As in, it's about community.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
There you go. Okay, you have another one. It's about people and community.
I will use this the next time.
Jen says it's about community. Jen hasn't read it, but she says it's about community. Do you have a deadline for it, or a book deal, or are you just seeing how it goes?
I'm seeing how it goes.
That sounds refreshing, actually.
I really want to be.
Yeah, no. Because I speak to, authors who have... or myself, I speak to myself, who have had one book and then feel the pressure and etc.
I think that I try to very deliberately not allow myself to be under pressure. I try to take a step back from anything that reminds me of that. And what I really want to create in terms of a creative space for myself is the place I was before my first novel got published, which was where I didn't even know if anybody was going to read it, so I could do anything I bloody wanted.
So how do you convince yourself that that's where you're at? Because that seems like ultimate goal for a lot of people.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things I have done is stay off Twitter as much as I love it, because literally every day somebody's talking to me about Stay With Me on Twitter.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate it. But it's also, I mean, like, it can be terrifying.
Because you wrote the book because it was haunting you, but you would like it to rest in peace now.
Yeah, kind of.
And here you are doing a podcast talking about it. I'm sorry.
No, I mean, I think I can do it now and then, but I can't do it every single day.
You can't do it when you're trying to write.
I can't do it every single day. So that's one thing I try to do. That I think that so far was a good decision.
Yeah.
I mean, I missed it a lot, but I can really pretend that book does not exist when I'm working, and it's really, really, I really enjoy that feeling, that freedom.
I'm just imagining you now as the ADD with extended family members around going, not where is your baby, but where is your book?
Yeah.
Where is it? Where is it? We're going to get you a ghostwriter so that they can do the book for you because you're not doing it.
Oh my god. You're not doing this quickly enough. Yeah. Don't worry about it. It's just a ghostwriter.
We've got it.
Really
we handle it. It's fine. We'll put your name on it. It's cool.
Oh my goodness. But it's also kind of a good thing in one way. Like, I feel like I can do that because of this book. You know, like, I can say, you know what, I'm not doing this because the book seems to be taking care of itself. You know, so I can sort of take a step back from it.
Yeah.
So
it's all grown up.
Yeah, it kind of feels that way. Good for it.
Yeah. So at the end of every podcast, I ask people to recommend a book that they have read recently and loved. What have you read recently and loved?
What have I read recently and loved? I haven't finished it yet. I'm kind of halfway through it, but it feels like I really have enjoyed what I've read so far. It's a novel called Freshwater. I don't think it's out in the UK yet.
No.
It's called Freshwater. It's already out in Nigeria and in the US, I think, by Akwaeke Emezi. It's a debut novel. And I think it's out in the UK next month. I really have enjoyed it.
Okay,
Yeah.
amazing. Thank you. That's it. Thank you so much.
you.
Thank you. I hope that you enjoyed this episode of Books with Jen. Thank you very much for listening. If you're new, please do subscribe. If you'd like to leave a review, that would be lovely. And as I mentioned at the beginning, if you would like to support on Patreon, that would be amazing. You can find me at patreon.com/Jen V. Campbell. The next guest on the podcast will be Anna Marie Crowhurst. We'll be talking about her book, The Illumination of Ursula Flight. So until then, I hope you guys have a great couple of weeks and I'll speak to you soon. Bye.